Ja, erstmal schönen Dank, dass du dich für das Interview bereitstellst. Du bist Professor in Cambridge für Erziehungswissenschaften.
You're a professor for education?
Yes, I'm head of the Faculty of Education in the university and have been involved in this work with raising boys' achievement within a gender context for over 10 years, 15 years almost.
Okay. Wie ist es zu dem Projekt gekommen? Was waren die Hintergründe oder die Erfahrungen, die euch veranlasst haben, dieses Projekt durchzuführen?
Which was the cause? Why was this founded? Why was the Raising Boys Achievement founded?
Some of the schools that we were working with were concerned that boys were doing less well than girls, and we began to work with them to try and explore issues in particular school contexts as to why there seemed to be a gender gap at secondary school in achievement. And then our government in the late 1990s nationally was trying to establish a project into raising boys' achievement within an inclusive context in different parts of England and Wales, and they asked us to conduct the project.
Du hast gesprochen von den Lücken, die die Jungs in den Leistungen hatten. Wie genau haben die sich bemerkbar gemacht? Was waren das für Lücken oder was war der Leistungsabfall von Jungen gegenüber Mädchen?
In which way it was the achievement of boys not as good as the girls? In which points could you really see that there were disadvantages of the boys?
Okay. Well, during the 1990s, during the decade of the 1990s, it became clear that boys were doing less well than girls in English and in the humanities subjects when they got to sort of the age range 13 to 16. But then when we started to analyse the data nationally from about 2002, 2003 onwards, it was clear that in the school leaving examination at 16, which is the end of compulsory education in England and Wales, girls were doing better than boys in every subject of the national curriculum. And then analysis of the data at university level showed that more girls than boys were going to university at 18, 19.
Wäre das vergleichbar in Deutschland? Da gibt es ja auch genau diesen Bildungsgap oder häufig, ne, dass in vielen Fächern mittlerweile mehr Frauen als Männer studieren.
He says it's just like in Germany, where it's now the case that more women than boys, than men actually complete the studies at university.
It's been very interesting because for us there's been quite a lot of evidence from the Scandinavian countries, from Canada, from North America, from Australia, from New Zealand. And so to be here and to pursue the same discussion in mainland Europe is really interesting for us, certainly. Very similar patterns.
Than in England?
As in England, yes. Girls exceeding boys' achievement right through secondary schooling. Yes.
Du hast gerade davon gesprochen, also ich habe so verstanden, dass es vor allen Dingen um Schulfächer ging. Ging es auch um Lernverhalten als solches, um soziales Lernen oder war sozusagen dieser Leistungsabfall vor allen Dingen in den schulischen Leistungen, also in den Fächerleistungen präsent?
He asked whether it was only that this gap, this lesser achievement was only seen concerning the achievement in schooling, or was it also seen in social behavior? Was it also seen,
Yes. I think there was an emerging concern during the 1990s about the behaviour of certain groups of boys, not all boys, and indeed some girls, but the majority groups of boys, yes, there became what our media began to call a moral panic about the social behaviour and the if you like, the behaviour of groups of boys on the streets, for instance. There were more boys becoming evident in youth unemployment. There was a feeling that there might be social unrest. Interestingly, it never really materialised at that level, but there was certainly an underlying fear, I think, at the turn of the century and, say, in the first 5 or 6 years of this century.
Betrifft das alle Jungs oder gab es schon eine bestimmte Schicht in Richtung Bildungsferne oder migrantischen Hintergrund, die dort eher betroffen waren? Oder würdest du sagen, dass es alle Jungs betraf?
Would you say that this concerns all boys, or does it concern special groups, for example, those which come from a migration background, or those who come from backgrounds where there's no, which is further away from educational background in the families?
Yes. I think it comes, the concern came through groups of boys who it was felt were significantly underachieving in education, not doing as well as they might do, and therefore weren't getting the skills that were needed in a knowledge economy. With the deindustrialization, as in Germany, I guess, and the movement away from heavy industry, traditional male employment was shrinking, and so there was a need for boys to have more qualifications to get jobs in the knowledge economy. Groups of those boys, if they were underachieving, weren't then being able to access jobs that were available. To some degree, it was associated with particular ethnic groups. The worst performing groups were boys from African and Caribbean heritage, but then not much better were boys from working class white backgrounds. So there was some ethnicity, but it was much more to do with the lack of skills to access jobs, I think, in the knowledge economy.
Was war dann genau das Ziel des Projektes?
What was the aim of the project?
The aim of the project was to try and identify schools which seemed to have strategies in place which were beginning to help boys to achieve better without detracting from the achievement of girls. I think I would want to stress that. That's particularly important because we were not concerned just with boys, but we were concerned with raising achievement of all pupils who were underachieving. The majority of those were boys, but there were girls too. But also there was the feeling that some schools were beginning to tackle the problem well. So we tried to work with schools in partnership to identify what those schools were doing, to see if we could then get hold of strategies which could be transferred to other schools.
In Deutschland haben wir ja ein mehrgliedriges Schulsystem. Ich bin jetzt nicht sicher, wie es in England aufgebaut ist.
He says in Germany we've got a schooling system which is 3 parts in a way.
Tripartite.
And he wants to know how it is constructed in England.
Okay. A simple answer would be to say that the majority of the schools we've moved away from the tripartite system, and most secondary schools are 11 to 18 comprehensive schools, in which all the children from an area don't go to the same school, and they have different types of curriculum within the school. Yeah.
Also was wie unsere
Gesamtschule
oder Gemeinschaftsschule,
ja,
was jetzt
so.
Gemeinschaftsschule ist. Die Zielgruppe des Projektes waren eher die Jungen oder mehr die Lehrkräfte und die Strukturen innerhalb der Schule?
Who were the ones the project aimed at? More the pupils or more the teachers and the strategies?
A really difficult question. Difficult to separate the two, I think. but essentially, I guess, more emphasis on on what the teachers were doing and how they were developing strategies. But a very crucial source of evidence for us was talking to students the whole time. There's a real strong movement in England to listen to students' voices about their own education. And over the last 5 years, the movement has it's got to a stage where what students say about their own education is seen as very authentic, an authentic source of evidence, and we want to take that into account. So we went back to the same schools over a 3-year period and continually talked to the same pupils, boys and girls, to get their impressions on their schooling.
One question would be for me as well. You did this with written, with spoken interviews, and you did questionnaires. Also das waren Fragebogen und auch
yes, start, midpoint and endpoint questionnaires, and focus group interviews with a researcher and 3 children, single-sex interview groups. Focus groups that would meet 4 or 5 times a year. Yes.
So groups of 3 people, 3 pupils?
3 boys or 3 girls, yes. And in each school there would be about 6 groups, 3 groups of boys, 3 groups of girls. And we started when the boys and the girls were 13 and we finished when they were 16. So we got their feelings about how their schooling was developing.
How many times did you meet a year?
5.
Habt ihr auch Methodenschulungen für die Lehrer gemacht?
Did you do method training for teachers?
We do method training for teachers.
Sort of strategy training.
Yes. But how best to explain this? Yes, when we were convinced that a strategy was working, we had teachers from other schools visiting the school where the strategy was in place to see how that was working initially. And we then tried to get the other schools to work through the strategy. When we were reasonably confident that the strategy was embedded in all 3 schools, we would then hold a local conference or a regional conference and eventually a national conference to try and diffuse the outcomes. I ought to say originally all the schools worked in groups of 3, so there were triads of schools.
So 3, it's you implemented the strategy then in 3 schools and afterwards you met?
A school where the strategy was in place first was linked with 2 where it wasn't in place. The teachers from these schools visited this school and then we tried to implement it in these schools so that we had 3 schools working together. When that appeared to be successful, we extended the scale to the local scale, to the regional scale, to the national scale.
Also wenn wir Jungenarbeit in Deutschland in Schulen denken, dann sehen wir nicht nur die Jungen, sondern sehen sozusagen den systemischen Ansatz. Und in System Schule wäre die Jungen auf der einen Seite, die Lehrkräfte auf der anderen Seite und die Strukturen. Und alles hat was mit dem Thema Gender zu tun, also mit Betrachtung von
So when in Germany when we're talking about working with boys, it's not only working with boys, it's looking at the structures, how is it linked with the schools and how is it linked with structure in general?
Yes, I understand. Yes, I think to some degree that's right. In the more successful schools where we worked, there would certainly be a commitment from the head teacher and the senior staff working on the sort of curriculum that was offered, the sort of pedagogy that was offered, the sort of assessment that we carried through. So it was very structural and it helped to transform learning and achievement, right, in those schools. But I wouldn't want to pretend that happened in every school. because in some schools it was simply in isolated pockets, and we weren't successful in transforming structures of pedagogy and structures of curriculum.
Das wäre schon meine nächste Frage gewesen. Was sind so gelingende Kriterien, um diese Arbeit erfolgreich zu gestalten?
Which are the criteria that make the work with boys, or the implementation of the new strategies? What are the requirements that have to be there to make it successful?
There are rather a lot of them. The head teacher and the senior staff need to be highly committed to what the school is trying to do. Not simply allow it to happen, but identify very publicly with it. That would be one thing. Yeah. We always used to say to heads that they needed to be proactive rather than simply permissive. Yes. Secondly, to get a cohort of staff who are really committed to it. We thought that we needed to get around 40% of the teachers working strongly with us as examples to others. And then the head teacher and those teachers needed to sell the strategy very strongly to the parent body. That would be another. Two other things, if I may. To allow head teachers to create a culture whereby teachers themselves could take risks and sometimes fail without fear of being condemned by the school hierarchy. Because some of these strategies were difficult and quite risky to put into place, and the teachers needed encouragement to think that they could do that and that they wouldn't be condemned if it actually failed.
Also es muss die Freiheit da sein, dass es auch wirklich.
And the final thing would be to allow time and to have patience.
Also Zeit und Geduld.
Some head teachers ran out of patience and abandoned the strategy before it had come to fruition, and it needed another term, 6 months, to actually give it chance to work through.
Bei den 40% der Lehrer, die mitmachen mussten, wie war so die in der Regel die Verteilung zwischen Frauen und Männern? Also meine Vermutung wäre, es gab mehr Frauen, die mitgemacht haben, als Männer, die angesprochen gefühlt
With
haben.
the 40% of teachers you had on your side, how was the gender there? Was there more female teachers, more male teachers? He was thinking, assuming that there would be more women.
No, it varied entirely according to school, really. We looked at this quite carefully. It usually was younger teachers. People who had been in post, say, 5-6 years rather than 15-20 years, but gender didn't usually play a component. It wasn't. Well, in some schools it would be, but in other schools it wouldn't. So it wasn't possible to generalise.
So it's interesting that age was more a criteria.
Age was more age and attitude.
Und wie ist es mit Lehrern oder Lehrerinnen, die Migrationshintergrund haben? Wie war da so die Verteilung?
It's interesting. He's asking whether a teacher with a migration background, would they support the project as well?
Yes, certainly. In some schools, teachers with who were either recent migrants to the UK or first or second generation would relate quite strongly to these children, to these students. Yes. Yeah. I think I'd want to say also that, just to emphasise, that we weren't just targeting boys. You know, as the project developed, so we had a group of girls. I don't know if Germany has the word ladette or something similar. Girls who exhibit laddish behaviour, who drink a lot, who behave very rowdily on the streets on a Friday and a Saturday evening, and getting at those girls as well as similar laddish boys became quite an issue for us.
Wenn wir in Deutschland über Jungenarbeit reden, dann sagen wir Jugendarbeit ist eine Haltung und keine Methode. Im Kontext zu dem Genderbegriff heißt es auch Auseinandersetzung mit eigener Männlichkeit. Ne?
So in Germany they say that working with boys is not, well, it's an attitude, it's not...
method.
It's not a method.
Und im Kontext des Gender heißt es auch eine eigene Auseinandersetzung mit eigener Männlichkeit. Wie weit war das Thema mit den Lehrern, ne, sich auch mit eigener Männlichkeit und mit Blick auf Jungen zu beschäftigen?
I think teachers found that very challenging. I mean, I think that was one of the things we were trying to get at, to get teachers to examine their own subjective interpretation of gender and how they responded to people who were different. So, for instance, how teachers would respond to boys who were other, who were gay, or to girls who were obviously gay. And some teachers found that very difficult. This is, I think, where age comes in, an attitude, because younger teachers found it much easier.
To be tolerant, maybe?
Yes, to be tolerant, yes. But also to be sensitive to the their changing role as a teacher, willing not to take themselves too seriously, willing to use humour, willing to engage in a bit of banter. Is that okay? You know,
okay.
that sort and to have an attitude which really wanted to get these boys and girls achieving, believing in them and trying to get close to them in a way.
Wenn man so ein Projekt macht, hast du ja selber einen Zugang zu deiner eigenen Gender-Geschichte, zu deiner eigenen Biografie als Mann. Was ist dein Zugang dazu?
When you're doing a project like that, you have well, an own attitude to gender, to your own gender. So, what is your opinion to your, well,
Mann sein.
to your manhood or to your,
My own opinion.
yeah, to your own.
Yes.
How do you feel being a man?
Yes, okay. That's quite interesting because the Faculty of Education that I'm head of is about 70% women in terms of staff.
70% Frauen sind angestellt, da wo arbeitet.
And people tell me that I'm quite a feminine man in how I relate to them, in that my predecessor was a very macho man, and I am quite different in style to him, much more difficult. We ought to have my other co-researcher here because she would answer this question much better than I would.
It's interesting because one gets into the point of characterizing men and women and what are the characteristics of them, isn't it?
Yes. I'm much more collaborative rather than hierarchical. I don't like open aggression.
Also arbeitet gern zusammen, offene Aggression ist nicht sein Ding.
I cry occasionally in public.
Weint in der Öffentlichkeit.
So I'm very different to the man who preceded me, and I'm very different to the man who's just been identified to succeed me. So it will be interesting. Yeah. But one of the things we tried to do was to get boys to be more open about their feelings, to talk more, to be more to be more willing to share views with girls when they felt insecure, to try and break down the stereotypes that we begin to talk about, you know, and to try and create a more a context in classrooms which was much more interactive and much less stereotypical. Difficult to do. And some male head teachers were very good. Even quite old, experienced head teachers were very good at enabling their boys to release feelings and to be more open, you know. And we had lots of girls who would, in our interviews, would say to us, this boy is really nice as an individual. If only he didn't behave like an animal when he was in a group. You know, I mean, which is...
Ich verstehe jetzt aber mehr, dass sozusagen dieses Achievement, also die Leistungssteigerung eben nicht nur sozusagen auf der fachlichen Ebene von Vermittlung, Lernvermittlung, anderer Lernvermittlung stattgefunden hat, sondern eben auch schon auch ganz viel auf soziales Lernen und auf Rollenverständnis nochmal abgehoben hat.
So he says that he understood the project like that is not only concerning school achievement, not only work on teaching and subjects, but also on the social development and on the roles on the gender roles of pupils. That so there were like these two, these two ways. One of was schooling and the other was just the social.
Yes, yes,
way.
Absolutely. There's a very interesting project being developed in Denmark at the moment on with primary school children, ages 7 to 11, on trying to get the children to explore what it is like to be a boy in a particular community in Denmark, or a girl in a particular community in Denmark at the moment, and what makes them as they are. Yeah, because our feeling is, I think, that by 13, quite a lot of attitudes are really developed. You know,
fixed already.
You need, yes, fixed. You need to challenge it earlier on, I think. Yes.
Eine letzte Frage. Du hast morgen einen Vortrag zum Thema monoedukativer Unterricht in koedukativen Schulen mit dem Fragezeichen einer Allheilmittel-Leistungssteigerung. Was sind die Erfahrungen mit monoedukativen Unterricht innerhalb des Projektes? Trägt es wirklich zur Leistungssteigerung bei? Beziehungsweise wie kann es optimal eingesetzt werden?
Well, first of all, it's difficult to pick out one thing, because often the schools that were doing the single-sex monoeducation were also doing quite a lot of other things, so we can't be certain. But in some schools, and by no means in all, but in some schools, pupil motivation, pupil engagement and pupil achievement did improve, because when the children were taught in single-sex classes. In other schools it had virtually no impact at all, which is why tomorrow I try and talk about the preconditions that we think are necessary if single-sex teaching in mixed comprehensives is actually going to work. Too many head teachers, and indeed our Secretary of State, our Minister of Education in 2001, got hold of the idea that single-sex teaching was the solution. And he gave us additional money to find the evidence. It isn't the solution of itself, because there are a number of preconditions that must be in place if it is going to help to improve achievement. And if those preconditions aren't in place, then it will fail.
Kannst du mal 2 oder 3 Kriterien nennen?
Could you give 2 or 3 criteria which are the preconditions that are necessary that it works?
A committed group of staff prepared to work together, to take risks and to support each other over an 18-month time period.
Also ein Lehrerkollegium, das wirklich davon überzeugt ist, also das auch wirklich willens ist, diese Sache mindestens über 18 Monate durchzuführen und das im Team diese Sache zusammen durchsteht.
A head teacher who is prepared to publicly associate herself or himself with the initiative and put their own reputation on the line as well.
Also ein Rektor, der wirklich dafür seine Hand ins Feuer legt und davon wirklich total überzeugt ist und seinen eigenen Ruf dafür auch aufs Spiel setzen würde.
And a group of teachers who are prepared to develop high quality pedagogy, which is not necessarily boy friendly or girl friendly, but student friendly.
Und Lehrer, die also auf jeden Fall ja, guten Unterricht machen wollen und nicht eine besondere Pädagogik für oder besondere Unterrichtsstrategien, die für Jungs wirksam sind oder für Mädchen wirksam sind, machen, sondern die guten Unterricht für alle machen. Also die wirklich Strategien sich ausdenken, oder mit Strategien arbeiten, die für alle gut sind. Also dass man nichts irgendwie isoliert macht. Guten Unterricht.
Ich höre aber raus, dass sozusagen der Lehrer oder die Lehrerin sozusagen der Hauptschaltpunkt ist. Oder wie soll ich das sagen, so die wichtigste Größe im ganzen System ist.
She gets the notion that the teacher is the most important factor of this all.
Teachers are crucial. The teachers are crucial, the atmosphere that's established within the school is crucial, the role of the head teacher is crucial.
Okay. Ja, also es ist ganz wichtig, dass ja, der Lehrer ist natürlich ganz wichtig, aber wichtig ist auch die Beziehung eben zum Rektor und im Prinzip ist es das, if I would just formulate it, it's just the ethos of the school. Also das Schulethos, ne, die Schulkultur, da muss es eben drin richtig fest verankert sein und dann wäre das eben die Voraussetzung.
And I think in terms of ethos, the school must accept that it's not going to be a simple, easy process, but it's quite complex and multifaceted, you know, and it really does need commitment through time to sustain it.
Also es ist, man muss eben sehen, dass es, wenn man das in einem Schulethos verankert, und dass es nicht eine Sache ist, die ganz einfach ist, sondern dass es eine Zeit braucht und sehr komplex ist, genau.
Yeah.
Gab es aufgrund des Projektes auch Schulen, die das im Leitbild oder im Ethos verankert haben?
There are schools that identify that they will offer, that they teach some subjects in some years in single-sex mono groups. There are other schools that commit to teaching nearly all the first 3 years of a secondary school in single-sex groups. So yes.
Thank you for the very interesting...
No. And thank you for some interesting questions.
Dankeschön.